what we're going to discuss today specifically is what the digital economy and digital trade can do for us, but also focus on the recently signed landmark DEPA deal, which is the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement between Singapore and New Zealand, and Chile, of course. But we're going to focus on Singapore and New Zealand today. And my view is that this is going to put the economy on steroids, hopefully. And as a Kiwi living in Singapore, I'm definitely very excited about this, and I'm looking forward to hearing much more in the sessions today. Just in terms of our speakers and the agenda today, we look forward to a welcome address from Her Excellency Joe Tyndall, the High Commissioner for New Zealand to Singapore. Joe has been very instrumental in driving the agenda for this Digital Economic Partnership Agreement. I know that it's taken a lot of blood and sweat, a lot of hard work from Joe here and the team, MFAT team back in New Zealand to stitch it all together. So congratulations for getting it all done and dusted in June 2020. Another great aspect of this deal was that this was arguably one of the first few global government-to-government deals that was signed as an electronic document. So I think that's a great sign of things to come. We'll also then hear from Randeep Sudan, who's the former global head of the Digital Development Unit at the World Bank. And of course, we're very pleased to have him as a board member of Ecosystem. Randeep will talk about how we can reimagine the digital economy and what it can do for us as humanity. And then following that, we'd love to hear from Alana Hudson, who's got the big ask of actually rolling out DEPA for the New Zealand industry. So Alana, we'd love to hear what we have in store for New Zealand companies, with the signing of the DEPA deal. And of course, finally, we have Subnindu Mohanty, who's the Chief FinTech Officer of the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Subnindu is huge proponent of digital trade. He was on Tech TV yesterday talking about it. We'd love to hear from SOP what digital trade can do and the role FinTech will play in accelerating digital trade. And then, of course, a great panel of panelists with all the speakers, but also including Bradley Bussetto, who is the director of UNDP's Global Center for Technology, Innovation and Sustainability based here in Singapore. And I'm looking forward to moderating that session. If you have any questions, please submit your questions in the Q&A, and we'll make sure we'll try and get it across to the speakers. And with that, I'd love to welcome Her Excellency Joe Tyndall and hand it over to her. And Joe, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Amit, and thanks for the introduction. It's such a great initiative, I think, to combine this event with New Zealand Tech Week. We worked closely with the Monetary Authority of Singapore and Ecosystem last year in the lead up to and at the Singapore FinTech Festival, where there was a strong New Zealand presence, and we really hope that there will be good opportunities to participate this year as well, even if that is virtual. The relationship between New Zealand and Singapore runs very deep, and it started with defence ties, and actually this year is a bit of a milestone with the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, which we will be marking here in Singapore in September, but not in as big a way as we had originally hoped. But today, our relationship between the two countries is much broader. And another milestone this year marks the 55th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations following Singapore's independence, where we were one of the very first countries to recognize Singapore in 1965. The strength and depth of our relationship is reflected in a really comprehensive enhanced partnership agreement, or EP, that was signed by our two prime ministers in person here in Singapore last May. That EP covers 4 pillars: defence and security, science and innovation, trade and economic, and of course, and particularly importantly, people-to-people links. And that is already resulting in multiple collaborative projects. So the EP was the platform that enabled us, along with Singapore and Chile, to negotiate the DEPA, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, as you said, signed just a few weeks ago in a fittingly virtual ceremony. The DEPA recognises that increasingly the digital economy isn't some techie thing off to one side. It is, in fact, the economy. And whether you're an MNC or an SME, whether you're working and trading in goods, services, or working in one of the many techs, FinTech, agri-tech, whatever tech it might be, it's relevant. And I think DEPA couldn't be better timed. Again, as you said, the shock arrival of the pandemic this year is changing irrevocably the way we work. Now it's from home as much as from an office, the way we shop online as well as going into a retail store, and entertain ourselves increasingly, and here in Singapore it's really the only way, digitally. And travel, well, we don't, or a lot less so. The digital economy is also really closely linked to the other defining challenge of our time, climate change and sustainability. And I hope that this morning, in some of the presentations we'll hear, we'll understand how it can help reduce emissions, ensure efficient resource use, and improve productivity in multiple ways. Now, speaking of efficiency, DEPA was a remarkably efficient negotiation too. Well, certainly by FTA standards. It was completed in under a year. And I have to say, Amit, that my involvement in this was pretty minimal to non-existent. It was largely driven by MFAT out of Wellington, of course. And within our post, though, my wonderful Second Secretary, Tessa Sinclair, played a very active role in helping to bring the DEPA to fruition. We're excited by the agreement because it sets a new bar for a treaty on digital. It goes beyond the e-commerce chapters that are increasingly a feature of either new or upgraded FTAs. The DEPA dips its toes into the waters of new areas like digital identity or AI, and it looks to find a balance between provisions to facilitate trade and those to protect consumer or business interests like privacy. Working with like-minded partners, Singapore and Chile, we do think very, very similarly and have very similar views on the world. We wanted DEPA to be a pathfinder treaty. We've done that before, where the three of us, along with Brunei, initially came up with the so-called P4 that over a period of years transformed into the Trans-Pacific Partnership and ultimately the CPTPP. And what we mean by being a pathfinder is making it open for others who are prepared to meet the standards to join. It breaks new ground by being modular with a number of discrete components. And because it's dealing with some frontier trade issues, it's also dynamic, capable of evolving and with new standards being elaborated in the future. Now, I know it's really easy to look at massive FTA tomes, thick with impenetrable legal language, and find yourself fighting insomnia or not even able to get beyond opening the first page if you even bother to. So it's really important for the practical effect to be clear. We want that light bulb moment of what this means, what this fine piece of legalese actually means for me, for my business. So I really hope that the panel discussion today and the presentation in particular by Alana is going to help with that reimagination. So that's it by way of a welcome. I'm now going to hand over the floor to Randeep Sudan for his presentation. Thank you.
So thank you very much, High Commissioner. It is indeed a pleasure to be online on this Reimagining the Digital Economy Trade Plenary. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our friends online. So the topic today, reimagining the digital economy, is very timely as we go through a black swan event marked by COVID-19. COVID-19 offers us a rare and valuable opportunity to rethink and revisit all our assumptions and beliefs about life and society. The term digital economy was first introduced by my friend Don Tapscott in his book, The Digital Economy, Promise and Peril in the Age of Networked Intelligence, and that was in 1995, about 25 years ago. However, we can no longer neatly compartmentalize the economy into digital and analog. The digital world touches every facet of the economy, as the High Commissioner mentioned, and the digital economy is slowly giving way to a new reality where the entire economy is becoming digital. When we talk about reimagining the digital economy, we have to place it in the context of rising unemployment, economic hardship, and widening wealth disparities, especially after COVID-19. I wish to argue that reimagining and reinventing the digital economy means reimagining 5 things on which I will focus today. First, reimagining the way people connect with jobs and acquire skills. Second, reimagining how we can increase our access to data and trust, because data is so foundational to the digital economy. Third, how can we reimagine analog organizations by adopting something called digital twins? Fourth, how can we reimagine networks of organizations using concepts of industrial internets and networking platforms? And finally, how do we reimagine our ambitions? And the last point is particularly important. I would request I think we can, go to the next slide. So the High Commissioner mentioned about the DEPA Modules, and the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement is indeed an important milestone. It represents the best thinking on how we should support trade in a digital world. You can see the various modules of the DEPA Agreement on this slide. I will be focusing on some of these modules today. I will try to present some examples of opportunities for governments and businesses within the framework of DEPA, focusing on business and trade facilitation, data issues, the wider trust environment, emerging trends and technologies, innovation and the digital economy, and small and medium enterprises cooperation. Let me first lay out the broader context for reimagining the digital economy. Researchers at the Australian National University recently estimated that the global economy could lose up to $21.8 trillion in 2020 due to COVID-19. The estimate of 21.8 trillion is in US dollars and not Australian dollars. The figure can be seen in the context that global GDP in 2019 was about $142 trillion. The International Labour Organization estimates that working hour losses for the second quarter of 2020, which just ended last month, compared to the last quarter of 2019, was the equivalent of 400 million full-time jobs. Moreover, out of the global workforce of 3.3 billion, 1.6 billion in the informal economy have also been impacted severely by the economic consequences of COVID-19. So while we see a loss in global GDP and rising unemployment, we are also witnessing greater wealth inequality. Many technology companies have benefited from COVID-19. Companies like Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix, Zoom have seen their stocks rise. In fact, between January 1, 2020 and April 15, Jeff Bezos's fortune is estimated to have increased by $25 billion. This increase is larger than the total GDP of Honduras, which was $23.9 billion in 2018. We see large disparities across countries in the world. Qatar's GDP per capita is $117,000, while the Central African Republic stands at a meager $661. About 2,200 billionaires have more wealth than 4.6 billion people, or 60% of the world's population. I mention unemployment and wealth inequality because we cannot reimagine the digital economy without focusing attention on these sobering shifts around us. Of course, as the High Commissioner also reminded us, climate change is another big element which we should be taking into account. While a post-COVID-19 would offer a grim picture, it also provides distinct opportunities for companies all over the world, especially for Singapore and New Zealand-based companies. So let's now go to the next slide. So with unemployment dramatically rising across the world, we will need to reimagine how we make connections between the supply and demand for skills. We need systems that can personalize and customize recommendations for each of us. I believe there is a huge opportunity for companies in this space. Labor market analytics is an area that is ripe for disruption. If we look at existing repositories of talent, data especially, the picture has many gaps. LinkedIn mainly captures data on white-collar professionals. LinkedIn has 575 million users as compared to the global workforce of 3.3 billion. The biggest talent platform, Upwork, was having about 14 million users just 2 years ago. So there is a need to pool public and private data on jobs and skills so that we can take advantage of the power of analytics and artificial intelligence to customize job matches, define skilling journeys, and streamline labor markets. Governments would be well advised to promote standard credentialing solutions that capture not just educational qualifications of individuals, but also their work experiences. There is an opportunity for governments, job posting platforms, academic institutions, training organizations, companies large and small, and analytics and AI players to pool data and collaborate on a data zone or a data market around employment. Singapore has come out with a trusted data sharing framework that offers useful guidance to companies to share their data. It is my personal view that governments also need to regulate and ensure that the private sector contributes data that is vital to the well-being of society. And meaningful employment is obviously one such area. Of course, governments also need to have better systems for the collection of more granular data on the workforce and share it with the industry. Let us now go to data markets. Data is foundational to the digital economy. Some say data is the new oil, but even more than oil, data is as essential to the digital economy as water and air are to life. Incidentally, there's even a data analytics company named H2O.ai. Data is also critical to the development of AI solutions. Companies in the future will compete on AI. Bank of America employs 209,000 people and serves 67 million customers. And Financial employs fewer than 10,000 people and uses AI to serve more than 700 million customers and offers a broader scope of services. According to one estimate, AI is likely to add $15.4 trillion to global GDP by 2030. Since data is the fundamental building block of AI, we will need better and bigger data markets. Data markets require data to be inventoried and assigned a monetary value. Perhaps we can reimagine data markets by focusing on cyber risk insurance. Data markets need inventories of data with a determination of monetary value, as I mentioned. And cyber risk insurance companies do just that. While offering cyber risk insurance, the premium needs to be calculated based on the value of all digital assets, including data. Singapore is a major financial hub with a large number of insurance companies having a presence in the city. The Monetary Authority of Singapore has been active on cyber risk management, and in 2016 had launched a cyber risk management project, bringing together industry, academia, and government in a partnership to tackle demand and supply challenges confronting the cyber insurance marketplace. It might be useful to work with cyber risk insurance players and the private sector to explore the promotion of data markets as a public-private partnership. Such an effort would be of immense value to both the public and private sectors. Given the increased cyber risks, it may also be worthwhile to explore mutual data residency between New Zealand and Singapore along the lines of Estonia's data embassies. If a disaster strikes one country, the data could be held securely in a second geographical location. Perhaps this is already being done, but I'm not sure. Let's now go to job creation opportunities. There is a big opportunity for creating jobs in the digital economy. The opportunity lies in the potential of reimagining analog organizations by adopting the idea of digital twins. A digital twin is the digital equivalent of any person, place, object, or process in the analog world. We will need to create digital twins for almost every organization and every entity going forward. There is a business opportunity for companies in Singapore and New Zealand, and of course others, to team up to help SMEs to digitize at scale, not only in Singapore and New Zealand, but across the world. The government of Singapore is supporting the digitization of Singaporean businesses, and even recently, as part of its digital resilience bonus, it is offering 10,000 Singapore dollars to companies to digitize. This digitization could be in terms of HR and payroll, or onboarding to e-commerce platforms, or using analytics and AI in their businesses. The opportunity of creating digital twins for companies and helping transform them is a significant global opportunity. Let me take the garments industry as an example. The fashion industry is a $2.4 trillion industry. Fashion employs 1 out of 6 people on the globe, making it the most labor-intensive industries. Most of these employees are women. Fewer than 2% of garment workers earn a living wage. Sustainability is a significant issue. 1 kilo of cotton requires nearly 10,000 liters of water. Processing 1 t-shirt and 1 pair of jeans requires almost 19,000 liters of water. If fashion production maintains its current pace, the demand for water will surpass the world's total supply by 40% by 2030. There is now a growing international movement focusing on sustainability in the garments industry. The fashion industry needs to digitize its supply chains for sustainability. Garments need to be rendered into 3D for use with virtual fitting rooms on e-commerce platforms. There is even a growing demand for virtual garments for fashion photography on Facebook or Instagram. Every SME will therefore require digitization of processes, products, and even workers if healthcare and skills development has to be addressed systematically. Digitization affords a considerable opportunity for companies to systematically team up and address the combined needs of supply chain digitization, process digitization, product digitization, and also onboarding companies onto e-commerce platforms. And this in itself is a huge employment generation opportunity. Of course, if we have to do digital twinning at scale, we would need to develop the architecture and standards for doing this so that we can derive the maximum benefits from this effort. Governments will need to play an active role in promoting digital twin standards and principles. For example, the Centre for Digital Built Britain has developed the Gemini principles as part of the UK's National Digital Twin Strategy. The principles revolve around purpose, trust, and function. Let me now come to the industrial internet. We need to reimagine as well the connections between companies. The Chinese initiative on industrial internets offers us an excellent model. Chinese policymakers have decided to deepen their technological upgrading following COVID. In early March, President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech announcing the development of the industrial internet and construction of new digital industrial infrastructure. By mid-May, China's National Development and Reform Commission launched its Digital Transformation Partnership Action Plan 2020 to promote cloud-based intelligence involving large numbers of SMEs. Alibaba Cloud's industrial internet platform, for example, has been rolled out in Huzhou, which hosts 20,000 small-scale apparel manufacturers who account for half of China's sales revenue in the sector. The industrial internet involves the creation of networks of SMEs that can be rapidly configured for designing and delivering products, allowing low inventories, highly flexible supply chains, and more efficient production. The reason I brought up China's industrial internet is that the organizational structure of production and distribution in the future will be very different. Approaches like the industrial internet can better prepare companies to become fluid, reconfigurable organizations that can rapidly respond to their business environment. According to the Institute for the Future will see ad hoc pop-up teams that find each other through algorithms. Software could allow for composition of teams which are capable of delivering on complex and multifaceted tasks. If we had a detailed understanding, for example, of each company in Singapore and New Zealand, if you knew the skills and experience of each employee, if you knew about each product and service, and the track record of fulfillment, it would be possible to create algorithms that could rapidly scan tender opportunities and configure partner companies best suited to deliver on any engagement. I think this is an idea worth supporting both by the industry and by governments. It would prepare companies for the emerging world of pop-up enterprises in the future. The networking of companies could also be facilitated by connections to trade platforms like Singapore's networked trading platform. There was the recent news of Trade Tech, a UK-based electronic trading platform teaming up with the Singapore Management University with support from the Monetary Authority of Singapore to develop a quantum computing credit scoring system. This initiative targets $15 trillion trade finance market. Such credit scores might allow for almost instantaneous access to trade finance. The speed of decision-making would be an improvement to Alibaba Group's MyBank, which has its model of 3-1-0, 3 minutes to apply, 1 second to approve, and 0 humans involved. So Singapore and New Zealand both have a very compelling value proposition in trade and ease of doing business, something which Amit pointed out in his introductory remarks. New Zealand and Singapore are the top 2 countries on the World Bank's ease of doing business. I think there is an opportunity for both countries to jointly promote the network trade platform and their combined expertise and ease of doing business with other countries. The networking value that the platform can potentially bring to companies across the world can be significant. Bringing the trade platform and ease of doing business expertise to other countries could be pursued as a quasi-government, quasi-private sector effort. I finally come to my last slide. And this slide relates to the points that I made previously on reimagining our ambitions. Mariana Mazzucato is a professor at the University College London. She's the founder and director of its Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. She completed an interesting study for the European Commission on mission-oriented research and innovation in the European Union. According to her, one of the best ways to promote innovation is to pursue mission-oriented projects. Such projects should be bold and have societal value with concrete targets. Ideally, they should be cross-sectoral, cross-actor, and cross-disciplinary. The pursuit of such projects can result in massive spin-offs, just like the Apollo mission to the moon. The mission to the moon resulted in the development of advanced technologies in aerospace, but also in low-tech industries like textiles. Singapore has launched its National Innovation Challenges with a prize of 2 million for each challenge and a pot of 40 million overall. While the program is well designed and targeted, its primary focus is on Singapore. I would suggest that we should also start looking at launching challenges that are global or planetary in nature and scope. These challenges will help our companies to develop cutting-edge technologies, attract the best talent from around the world, and inspire youth to pursue game-changing opportunities. Who knows, it might also lead to a complete reimagining of the digital economy. Thank you very much. And let me now hand over to Eleanor Hudson. Over to you, Eleanor.
Kia ora tātou. I'm assuming you can hear me. It's wonderful to be here today to be able to speak to quite a diverse and exciting audience based on the RSVP list I saw earlier. And there's certainly been a lot to think of. I've already taken 2 pages of notes so far this afternoon, and that's just basically Randeep alone. The theme of reimagination is a really apt one, I think, given what we've been trying to do all along with the DEPA in terms of looking at how we can be innovative and really look for new ways to solve the new problems we're all facing. So there's been some quite detailed ideas so far, and Joe has talked nicely through why we ended up working with Singapore and Chile as we did. So I don't want to repeat that too much, and I know what you really want to know is, well, what does this mean for my business and what opportunities there are? So I will try and focus in on that. As Joe noted, though, this is a process that came together very quickly. Trade negotiations usually take years, and DEPA basically was an idea that was launched in May last year and was signed in June. So basically a year's work, which is amazing for such an innovative area. And as noted, we've also broken new ground by signing a treaty using electronic signatures, which is something New Zealand has simply never done before. I think a really powerful idea that I want to share with you that is important for us is, you know, we really recognise that New Zealand firms are extremely innovative and make really good use of digital technology and ideas. The COVID experience has really shown just how nimble we can be. We want our trade policy to be just as innovative and responsive to business interests, and that's what we hope that DEPA can achieve. The context has changed since we started the DEPA work. That was initially part of our response to what we saw as an increasing turbulence in the international trading system. A lot of the things that New Zealand has held dear for a very long time started to come into question in the last couple of years. And so we've been thinking very hard about what are ways that we can try and do things a little differently to try and rewrite the system. COVID has, of course, happened in that time too, and that has forced us all into a very different world. Now, we're fortunate in New Zealand that as long as we're not trying to pass our borders, we're able to move pretty freely now, and that is something I think we all hold very dear. But of course, the world outside is a very, very challenging place, and given how important the international environment is for New Zealanders, it is therefore having major impacts for us domestically as well. We are a small trade dependent economy. We really need stability offshore in terms of trade rules, which is my core business, but also in terms of how the global economy is functioning as well. So DEPA is one of our examples in trying to respond to that. You will see others in time, including around themes around climate change, trade and sustainability. So on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more through what it is that DEPA includes. Now, Randeep has already talked about all of the modules, so I'll try and not repeat them all. But I think the way we look at it is that the DEPA breaks into three sorts of areas. There are provisions that look quite a lot like things you might have seen in some of our previous free trade agreements, such as the CP, TPP. These are existing provisions and rules that have been previously acknowledged as important, and we wanted to reiterate that in this context. In some places, this is a reaffirmation of other commitments we've made elsewhere, and the provisions we've got around data flows and data localization are an example of that. In other areas, we've started with something we've done before, but we've built on it to reflect our shared ambition about how we can really contribute to the digital economy. So reflecting the economy more broadly rather than just trade. And so some of the examples of that are things like on consumer protection, where we've tried to go beyond what had become the status quo of saying it's important to look after consumers when they're purchasing things online, to really look at, well, how do we do that? What is it important and that helps give consumers trust in what they're doing in an e-commerce world? Is it around transparency and things around redress processes? Paperless trading and trade facilitation related issues are a really important priority. They're something that's very dear to my heart. But here we've tried to shift the debate away from being a focus just on customs procedures, as was done in the World Trade Organization's Trade Facilitation Agreement, and instead looking right across the border and moving beyond the electronic idea of having a PDF document, which is still effectively just a document, to how do we work to cooperate so that we can exchange data and information, and how can this be nimble and be accessible to those that need it. So our systems aren't fully there yet, but we're working on it very actively, and COVID has sped that process up. A second set of areas are areas where we felt that it was really ripe for rules and standards, but they were more or less things that people hadn't done before. So electronic invoicing is a really good example of this. We previously had a short provision on this in our recently upgraded agreement with Singapore, but the DEPA provision really takes it further, reflects our shared experience so far, including some of our experience we've had working with other countries such as Australia. And it's a really live issue in New Zealand because the government is actively taking steps to support e-invoicing within New Zealand, but also cross-border, effectively to make sure that SMEs are getting paid on time and are getting paid effectively, to help deal with some of those real cash flow challenges that so many firms face. Another area which goes down a route that Randeep was talking about before as well is around open data. And it's another area where we think that there are things that governments can do to help support innovation in industry, as well as in government and research and other areas. So we've, for a while, been a very active member of the International Open Data Charter. Apologies for those who don't follow the Kiwi accent there. And We really support all efforts to make data accessible so that innovation can take place. And I wonder if this is similar to the data market idea that Randeep was talking about around a public-private partnership. So far, the provision in the DEPA and what we're looking to do with this more broadly has been more focused on information the government holds. So how can we make information more readily available to businesses so that they're able to develop their own innovative products and services? If we're able to bring corporate data into this in some ways as well, then that just makes it all the richer. The third area, which I think is the most exciting part of the DEPA, is what we're calling frontier issues. And these are generally not areas where anyone has ever even attempted hard or binding rules. But for us, they're placing a marker in the sand to demonstrate that we know how important these factors are for the digital economy and the potential for how governments act on these issues to really negatively impact businesses and trade if we get it wrong. So we know these issues matter, but it's just simply too soon to know what good looks like. And in some areas, we simply don't even have a very developed domestic regulatory system, let alone an international one. So what we've tried to do in these areas with the DEPA is to set up agreed principles for future regulation on these kinds of issues and active cooperation between the parties. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel because some of this cooperation is already happening. But what we want to do is make sure that we are definitely working together where it makes sense to do so. So that's not all going to be through the DEPA Joint Commission, which is where the officials get together and talk about things on a regular basis. But what we want are the expert regulators talking about it in the margins, the digital margins at the moment of international meetings, and for example, ISO or somewhere like that. And more importantly, we also want industry and others who have an interest in these areas to be able to engage in that conversation as well. So some of the examples of these frontier issues are ones that sort of are an economic opportunity in and of themselves, but are equally enablers of everything else. So digital identities, for example, is an important opportunity for firms looking at tech solutions in this area, but equally it's going to be really important to enable us to move to a real paperless operating environment for the border because it supports verification and trust. Artificial intelligence and AI is obviously got to be in the mix there. How we engage and work with SMEs is really important, and I'll come back to that. But another thing, which is something that was a New Zealand perspective that was brought into the process, is around digital inclusion. And this is a really broad issue, but it's a very, very real one for us here. And we want to ensure that everyone is able to benefit from the opportunities of digital trade in the digital economy. So that includes women, Māori and other Indigenous groups, as well as rural communities. So DEPA provides us a platform for dialogue on this and enhancing people-to-people links. So in various different contexts, in New Zealand, there is a trade-focused Te Taumata group who has been having a number of conversations internationally with other Indigenous groups interested in trade issues. Some of the themes they've been exploring there are digitally related. How to harness the power and opportunity of e-commerce, but in a way that respects local values. For rural communities, I grew up in a rural area and my parents have atrocious internet access. It's wonderful to escape work because the cell phones basically don't work there. But you know, for people in that operating environment, it can be very challenging to try and do things digitally when you simply don't have the coverage. And I wonder if this also plays into a question of diverse tech. I don't know if you can see behind me, I have one screen in one background and one in another, all for different kinds of technological solutions. And sadly, none of them worked today for this presentation, so I'm actually on an iPad. And so simply that plethora of solutions out there as well, that you then have to have so much different equipment and software to be able to service, how is that affecting people's ability to truly harness digital, or is it just too hard? So the next thing I want to talk about, which is on the final slide, is around what we want to do with all of this, because we don't want it to just sit on the virtual shelf and collect dust. We want to get some really meaningful runs on the board, and we want to do that quickly. So the value of DEPA is going to come from what we do with it. And by we, I mean us collectively, not just what government officials do. So Joe talked earlier, we've described all along the DEPA as a living agreement. Now, what we mean by this is that just like living organisms, we want it to grow and evolve and learn over time. And cooperation is going to be very important to this success. At the moment, the parties are busy finalising our steps domestically so that the agreement can enter into force, and our process is wrapping up in the New Zealand Parliament. I'm not quite sure when we'll be able to say we're officially entering into force, but we're already having conversations around, well, what is it that we want to start work on first? So that will all be about getting the processes and the cooperation and the engagement up and running quickly so that we're able to start to think around how we want this agreement to grow and evolve. We're also very much thinking about how we can bring some of the ideas and interests into other contexts. So most of you will know that New Zealand is hosting APEC next year. We'll be hosting it virtually, which presents a new set of challenges, but we're still looking at what of these ideas can we bring into the very rich digital discussion in the APEC context. Similarly, we're already running some of these ideas in World Trade Organization discussions around digital issues. So the more we learn from implementation, the better we're able to bring the ideas into those other international contexts. And, you know, they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Well, we are seeing other countries borrowing our ideas in their work, and we're quite happy to see that happen as well. Cooperation, as I said, is going to be key to our success. And as you should have picked up from my earlier comments, that cooperation has to involve business and other stakeholders as well as government officials. We're still thinking about exactly what this cooperation is going to look like. And so if you're interested and have ideas, please get in touch. One interesting idea where work is underway is already around digital facilitation of goods trade, or making traditional trade work better. So there we are looking at how we can try and make those border processes more data-driven while still being able to manage risks, speeding up the movement of goods and building trust in how the system can work. Now, there's huge opportunities there. New Zealand produces amazing products, food and beverage, for example, and that New Zealand origin carries a lot of trust with it. If we're able to find tools here that support that trust in consumers overseas and provides useful verification of that origin, then that is going to create even more opportunities, particularly in the e-commerce space. COVID has also really activated work in this area around paperless trading and electronic certification. I mentioned earlier that one of the novel areas we've included in the DEPA is the SME dialogue. And the idea here is to ensure that we really have an SME voice, which is absolutely important for the New Zealand tech sector, and that it's heard loud and clear. But it's also an opportunity for SMEs with an interest in digital issues to engage with other small firms, including overseas. So we are completely open to ideas about what this looks like. We can have an open discussion around what some of the challenges and opportunities and frustrations that SMEs have in the digital economy. That's fine. But if it's of interest, we can also effectively put in speed dating type initiatives as well to really help connect small firms with partners overseas. And this fits into some of the stuff we're doing in a wider COVID recovery program, where we're very conscious that people would normally be on planes and going to trade fairs and other things to create new business opportunities. And so the government is very committed to doing everything we can to try and fill that gap as best we can. So part of that is in terms of our network offshore, so government representatives offshore, trying to step into your shoes and be as responsive as possible. But the other is looking at what kind of fora can we create and support to help those conversations happen as well. The other thing is around practical implementation. So in many areas, the DEPA obliges us to work with Singapore and Chile on issues like competition policy. So there's already established international processes around competition, and there's a lot of consideration being done around what the challenges are in the digital environment in this area. But we're able to have a dialogue and a process to work with our partners around what we think about that, so we can influence the international debate. Another area is around how to digitalize government procurement and what kind of opportunities can changes in the way governments are purchasing goods and services in the digital world maybe make opportunities more accessible to firms. Financial technology or fintech, and I know some of the sector are on the call, is the other area we're really looking to delve deeper into. So we want to support cooperation between firms directly, as is already happening between New Zealand and Singapore. We want to do what we can to promote fintech solutions for businesses, going beyond electronic invoicing, but also encourage collaboration to support that exchange of talent, including in startups. So some of the ideas Randeep was discussing around job creation and how the labour market might change probably fit in there as well. But the main message I want to leave you with is that we want DEPA to work for you, business, and to do that we need your ideas about how you want to make this happen. So on the screen you can see an email address in which you can get in touch with us. So please do contact us. We really want to hear from you and are happy to delve deeper into anything else. But I also look forward to the questions and thoughts in our discussion later on today. So thank you for the opportunity. Over to you, Supnindu.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I hope you all can hear me. So given I had very knowledgeable speakers ahead of me, so I thought let me put some nuance against what they have spoken till now. I would say COVID-19 showed one thing clear: the technology progress till now has largely failed. Because if you look at your own personal examples, when you go to these e-commerce sites and try to buy things, all the problems are now far more visible than it used to be before COVID-19, because you were kind of used to the hybrid model of e-commerce, physical interaction. So a lot of the shortcomings in a digital world was not on your face. And when you are completely relying on a digital ecosystem, you can see there are hundreds of problems to be resolved. One of the biggest standout problems from my perspective is lack of digital empathy. Let me repeat, the lack of digital empathy. The chatbots are horrible. Even the most advanced e-commerce chatbots didn't work. And they were horrible not only the way they express themselves, they're horrible against every possible AI engine they claim to be running on. So the so-called fabulous high-speed AI really didn't work. So let's get into some reality check before we get excited that world is ready for a digital transformation. Third, most of the e-commerce, most of the digital experience were highly concentrated, monopolistic in business companies, and they were driving a particular forced buying from particular set of suppliers. So it was essentially a closed loop ecosystem priced in a way it can be completely out of the hand of market forces. So the whole mechanism of e-commerce was largely monopolistic, largely concentrated in few players. It was not truly a democratic process. It is not truly an all-inclusive process. So that's on the e-commerce side, because I don't have much time, so I don't want to go deep into these things. I'll leave all of you some set of reality. Second, the so-called financial inclusion progress didn't work. Give example. You go around all the countries where financial inclusion was a top priority. Right at the crisis, every laborer, workers, migrant workers from every country went back to the villages. They couldn't even sustain a more than a week in a large city because there's no financial inclusion. There are no savings. They had no pension plans. They had no retirement plans. They have no access to money where they're not working and they can sustain themselves in a way they can get over the crisis within a couple of months. So as the crisis came in, within 2-3 weeks, many large cities saw a reverse migration. One of the reasons is lack of a pension plan, lack of an emergency fund, lack of a micro insurance. They were not non-existent. There were a lot of theories, a lot of public headline messaging, a lot of things are happening. Nothing worked. I have not seen a single evidence where something has worked for financial inclusion during crisis. Migrant workers were struggling to send money back home. And very rarely for a country where things were there, the systems were there, they were able to respond, but the receiving side didn't exist. So there was a whole issue around of addressing financial inclusion in spite of significant progress made in this space. And let me go to the third category. Right at the edge of the crisis, I was looking at the fintech numbers, and almost every fintech firm had one or two significant problems. The most striking problem to my mind is that every investor's commitment to spend money for product development started getting slow. And what is interesting to observe that the companies which raised a lot of money during the crisis are the companies who truly focused, and they were otherwise not that attractive, by the way, who truly focused in digitizing the most difficult part of our business is SMEs. The companies who are digitizing SMEs were the most attractive companies during the crisis. The companies who are helping to digitize financial institutions were the most attractive companies. And the companies who are not doing that didn't attract any significant money. I'll give you an example right out of Singapore. Singapore last year, the fintech investment was close to $1.2 billion, which may not be big for many countries, but compare against 2015, we used to attract $50 million. Within 4 years, you go to $1.2 billion, quite a big number. The COVID-19 crisis started evolving in February. By March, it became clear that things are going to go in a very serious way, and things are not going to turn out to be well. The total cumulative investment in Singapore FinTech was close to $95 million. And if I do the math 4 times, you can do your math. It will be way below the last year performance. But from March to July, the next 6 months, May, June, July, and the 6-month cumulative number of fintech investment in Singapore went up to $640 million. And almost 80% of the new money came right through the crisis. And we were taken by surprise. What happened? I mean, you would expect that numbers would go further down. You'd expect the numbers to get further, almost flat from where we are in the first 3 months, at least minimally, but it went like a hockey stick. And you look at the numbers below. The numbers were high because investors were quite smart. They shifted their investment to companies who are helping SMEs. They shifted the investment to companies who are digitizing the core. They're shifting the money who are digitizing the core, vulnerable backbone of every economy, the SMEs. So having a product which really works on core digitization is going to be largely a story for next 9 to maybe next 2 to 3 years, because that's how we're going to recover post COVID-19. Now, in my mind, we're going to reset. There's a need to be a digital reset. So we talked about digital empathy, which is missing. We need to start thinking about a complete reset of our digital thinking. I think we got to stop thinking about quantum computing, massive AI adoption. We got to go back to the basics. What are the basics in the mind? Is to start looking at your own national digital rails, because a country with a robust national digital rails are likely to sustain the future economic crisis. My thinking is we're going to reset ourselves from an economic construct, from a productivity and efficiency to resiliency and sustainability. So if you're going to reset ourselves to resiliency and sustainability, you've got to have a robust national infrastructure, which I think Sudan, Randeep spoke about it. Alana also spoke about it, that we got to have trusted ID systems in place. We got to have a trusted payment infrastructure in place. We got to have a trusted data systems in place. You must have a trusted consent systems in place. I'm not talking about a small data set, a large data set of trusted data which can be used to build the future digital solutions. So having a trusted national digital rail becomes the key success driver for the future economic construct in the new world of high tech and low touch economy. The second are the policies. I think we have to admit, in spite of the progress in discussion between different government, I don't think we have connected our payment systems yet. Find out a country which has connected two payment system point to point, zero. Not a single countries have seamlessly connected the payment system. We have just started seeing some right in Singapore. We have connected to India our merchant payment systems, the nets, and in India RuPay. We are in the process of connecting our payment rails with Thailand. But that's just few examples. How can you run a digital economy where your payment systems are not connected? Forget about AI, cloud computing, quantum computing. Your basics are not connected. What makes us feel that we will be working in a different construct as we think about our recovery? So that's one. The third aspect is data connectivity. Yes, we are talking, but our rules are almost the opposite. There's no mechanism for us to share data cross border. There's no mechanism to trust and believe the data as a credible data, as a data which has got legal backing for many things we process cross border. That doesn't exist. So having policies to align around data connectivity has to be given serious thought before we can talk about a true connectivity, a true digital economy. And then the last piece is trade connectivity. We saw it right through the crisis. What has happened? You go and ask any SMEs in across ASEAN market, they don't have basic digital tools to even connect to an electronic payment system. When I said digital tools, do they have an accounting system which can be straight through from a third-party provider? Answer is probably no. They probably don't know. Do they have a third-party cheaply available ERP services? Answer is probably no. Do they have a connectivity to goods and services logistic company? Answer is probably no. I think the idea is to find a way to digitally transform MSMEs, SMEs to a digital platform through an e-tooling process. What I mean, you have to e-tool all these companies to a digital platform, and then we can think of connecting them through various services. Finance is the backbone. Payment has to cross-connect. Payment has to be interoperable. What we need to build is all this e-tooling of these companies so that when they truly connect, it's an end-to-end connectivity. It's an end-to-end digital transformation. Without doing those basics, I think, again, we'll be in the same trap of a lot of headline positivity, but in the real connectivity doesn't exist. So we've got to fix those basic e-tooling as our next immediate priority as we get ready for the digital economy. And lastly, I use the word processes. We talked about platforms, we talked about policies, and then we talk about processes. Who are the processors of digital infrastructure? Who are the processors of digital data? Who are the processors of all the new tools available? Are the banks themselves, are the SMEs themselves, and other government services, e-services. So we got to find how to create a sense of translating this infrastructure to market reality. And to do that, every processors have to think their own construct of how they interoperate, connect to this large infrastructure. And the critical piece in the processors ecosystem is talent. Because today, the talent which are the leadership which runs these shops, or the middle level management which manages the businesses, are still not digitally ready. And how do we get them to a talent base which manages this new opportunity becomes a key question and a key opportunity discussion for a lot of the firms who are going to process this data as they build the new design for the digital economy. So that's what I see the big link. We got to find a way to bring all this together. We got to have some dose of reality and then find a way to reset ourselves. And I think Sudan spoke about the digital twin. Fantastic idea. But how to get there needs some basic reset to be done. With that, I'll hand over to Bradley, who has got perhaps a bigger picture on the financial inclusion side.
Well, I think we would love to welcome Bradley on now. We can kick off the panel and an opportunity to bring Bradley's thoughts. Just as a side note, Bradley is the keynote at tomorrow's session on the role of technology in food assurance. Bradley, for those of you who joined us late, Bradley Bassetto is the head of UNDP's Global Center for Technology Innovation and Sustainable Development. And he's based in Singapore, although at the moment he's quarantined in Japan. So welcome everyone. Again, great to have this panel. I have to say, it's been really hard for me scribbling lots and lots of notes as I've been talking. Just the volume of quality content that was shared, the thought process that you've triggered, all of you, you know, Joe, Randeep, of course, helping us reimagine, and Alana giving us a view of how we can roll out this for New Zealand. And then, of course, Swapnindu, generally the man who helps us shape our thinking of what the future could look like, giving us a bit of a reality check as well. So I think I am really looking forward to this panel session. I might use the opportunity also to include some of the questions from the audience. But I wanted to first of all start with Her Excellency Joe Tyndall, just to kind of get things moving. I mean, we talked about digital trade, and we'll get into a lot more nuances that everyone's referred to today. But Joe, this was when we spoke a few times about it, and I know this has been a great couple of years from a New Zealand-Singapore partnership perspective. First with the enhanced partnership, which was inked last year. And you know, again, we're very proud to have been involved in showcasing that event in Wellington last year. But and then this year to follow it up with DEPA. When you spoke to me the last time, you referenced the fact that this has the potential to extend beyond the current partners, which are New Zealand, Singapore, and Chile. So given that we have audience joining us from different parts of the world, where do you see the potential for this to extend beyond you know, New Zealand, Singapore, and Chile?
Well, I think that's really a question of who might be interested. It's a question both of interest and also, I guess, preparedness to apply and live by the rules and standards that are set out in the DEPA agreement. Alana will probably definitely be better placed than I am to talk about joining or an accession a strategy, but it's my understanding that it's still a little bit in development and in a matter of discussion amongst the three initial partners. As we said, and Alana mentioned, the agreement hasn't formally entered into force yet. We're hoping it's close, but it needs 2 out of the 3 as a minimum members to domestically ratify the treaty, and at that point it enters into force. So yes, I guess the idea is to have it open, definitely be encouraging and supporting those who wish to join. But I'll leave Alana to talk a little bit further in what that might entail.
Great, thank you.
Shall I just chip in?
Yeah, absolutely, please.
Great. I don't actually have that much more to say to Jo. As she said, we want this to grow. We want it to expand. We want new economies to join into the process to help add value. And basically, the minimum standard is you have to be able to meet the standards of the DEPA. We're not looking to go backwards in any way. What we do hope is that new parties who join bring new ideas and are prepared and enthused to get involved in that cooperation. So it's not something where, if people are looking to collect large numbers of treaties and not do very much with them, DEPA is probably not for them. But for someone who is equally interested in really getting into some of these really, really nitty-gritty pieces of work down the track, then DEPA should present a really exciting opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And since since we're in a phase where we're operationalizing this between the partners, I thought this might be a good opportunity for me to jump over to Supnendu. So we have talked over the last 12 months about a topic, and you referenced that earlier in your session. Actually, you referenced a few points, and I wanted to bring all of them into one piece. You referenced trusted data, and I know you've talked about the importance of data sharing between economies. You referenced payments, integrated payments, or more seamless payments mechanisms beyond economies. So I wanted to share a few thoughts and see what you think of it. New Zealand and Singapore both, given that we have this DEPA deal now, and New Zealand and Singapore both share very similar ethos in general, in terms of our focus on people, but at the same time, very, very strong norms around probably among the best around data privacy and governance norms across both the countries. Second, Singapore in its current context is very advanced in terms of digital payments. But to put it into perspective, New Zealand was one of the first countries to literally go cashless, with FPOS 3 decades ago, right? And that has been a phenomenal journey. And I remember before I moved to New Zealand, if I had $10 in my wallet, that was a lot of money I was carrying around with me because I never needed to pull out cash. Given this, these two factors, do you think there is an opportunity for New Zealand and Singapore to be collaborating a lot more from a from a fintech payment, and of course, because all of this accelerates digital trade?
Sure, absolutely. I think when people say they're a cashless society, they probably ignore the fact that people who procure the goods are not necessarily cashless. Because when you procure a good from India or China or Philippines in New Zealand, that process will be highly non-digital. It may seem to you that as a consumer in New Zealand, you are using a lot of credit card, a lot of cashless payment, but the underlying economic rails, which brings that goods to Singapore, to a country, may not be cashless. They may be the payments between the two companies are still being in an old-fashioned way. The processes which is connecting them are still a paper processes being exchanged. In my mind, you truly call yourself cashless, where your cash payment is embedded with your asset transfer, which means when I'm moving my goods, at the exactly same time, the money is also moving. That's a true end-state cashless society, where you are not only connecting the goods and services as they move, they're also moving payment rails on the same time. And this is domestic. If you extend globally, you got to find a way with your trading partner. And your question was Singapore. If I think New Zealand and Singapore, if they truly want to be a cashless economy and a cashless trade partner, they're going to find a way together to connect the payment rails, very bare minimum, because you can't have a e-trade, a digital trade running on a system which is not connected. So having a payment connectivity should be an imperative for policymakers to think as we pursue our partner, because we have a good natural partnership between the two countries in terms of how we look at digital transformation. Our belief in digital economy is quite high. We've got to find a way to connect our payment system. That's to me a minimum hygiene. Start thinking about the new digital reset. On the data side, I think both countries have high trust factor. They're trusted economy, and they have a strong policy governance around data protection. Having that strong policy framework domestically gives the opportunity both countries to exchange data on a trusted corridor. I use the word trusted corridor, where two parties are trusted. There's equivalence in the rules and the policies and legality of protecting data exchange between the two countries. So we have the right policy framework, the right mindset, and the right construct, a right domestic infrastructure. We've got to find a way to connect this in a real world so that we can truly run our e-commerce on this trusted rail much more thoughtfully. And I use the word step away from productivity and efficiency, move to resiliency and sustainability.
Mute.
You got into mute.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. I said the most profound thing, and I can't remember what it was. But just in terms of what you were saying, I wanted to link this to as a linkage into a question from the audience, and I'm going to open this up to the panel to answer that. The question is, often trade and trade agreements are focused on large businesses, and to your point, Sop, I think for digital trade, SMEs need to be fully immersed into this process, right? Because 97% of our businesses are SMEs. So in practice, is there anything tangible that could be done to connect SMEs into each other's markets? Will DEPA support this? If so, how? So I might pose this to Alana first, and then maybe get the other panelists to contribute if they have something to say.
Thanks. And I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. That's what DEPA is about. I talked a bit in my presentation around the SME dialogue. This is the first time we've ever hardwired that into a treaty. So some of the ideas, we try and incorporate that in how we implement existing trade agreements. But this is something that actually we have an obligation in international law to do. And so that is something that's quite different. As I said, we're completely open-minded about what that looks like. It can be policymakers talking, and it can be businesses talking, and it can just be talk and exploration of ideas, or it could be an opportunity to be far more commercial in nature as well. And so I suspect it's going to be a combination of all of those elements. But that is a specific activity. But what we want to feed in is how all of those modules evolve over time as we get to something like digital identities. I just saw there was a specific question around that, and blockchain and what DEPA might do with that. Now, blockchain is, of course, one technology to achieve an objective. As we learn more about what this means in an international context and what we need to be committing governments to do, so to mean that countries have to do certain things, that we can then think about what rules might need to be written into the DEPA and into other contexts as well. So at the moment, all of those frontier issues we know are really important, and we know that business are living and breathing them right now, but it's just not yet clear what the problems at the international level are that we need to solve through actually creating rules. But again, it comes down to, we hope DEPA is another element in the New Zealand-Singapore relationship, and of course in the New Zealand-Singapore-Chile relationship as well, around just actually getting firms thinking about us as partners and the opportunity, and reinforcing that message that NZ Tech is really interesting, innovative, and we're natural partners. We don't just produce high quality food and beverage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a great segue into a question I have for you, Bradley.
Sorry, Amit, can I just quickly,
Sure,
I just want to bring this thought to the panelists here, especially High Commissioner here. When we tell SMEs to digitize and ask them to connect, there are many mountains to cross to get there. And we should not get misled by partnership when we say partnership by two companies connecting to each other. To me, that's not a true connectivity. The true connectivity comes where a small producer in New Zealand, without any partnership with a large corporate, can actually connect to a small buyer in Singapore through an open public good rails, where they have access to all possible digital tools and where they can trade seamlessly at both sides by processing their goods, by exchanging certificates, by moving payments, getting the custom clearance, all the process through a digital services, and without putting a lot of physical effort to get that thing done. I think if you ask a small SME, it is just too much of complicated process today. And what they do essentially, they end up sourcing their product to a large buyer who again sources to another large buyer, and they end up being part of a too large company just doing trade among themselves. I think the challenge for all of us is to how to translate that and make it more democratic. When I say democratic, is to build more public good, which will connect SMEs point to point without depending on large corporate intermediaries in between.
And having read specifically around the DEPA modules, so to that point, I think the provisions in that are actually geared towards those. If I may jump in, High Commissioner and Alana, because it references to paperless trade and streamlining the customs processes and removing tariffs on digital transactions and e-invoicing and e-payments and so on. So there is provision for that, but I think Swapnindlu makes a really good point. I don't know if High Commissioner, yourself or Alana would like to comment on that.
I think a critical point is to note that DEPA is kind of a beginning, or at least it's not the end point along the digital highway at all. And Alana very clearly identified that, particularly in the new frontier areas, we've just done a placeholder at this stage, saying we need the input of ideas and so on to be able to work out what sort of rules, if any, are needed, and with what objective, in terms of either facilitating trade or providing protections that might need to be in place. So it's definitely not a done and dusted thing. I think what Alana has also pointed out is that by setting up a format for dialogue, but also actively looking for inputs, then that allows us to make some progress with problem identification. And Sop, I think you've really sort of certainly enlightened me with some of your thinking today. But problem identification, but also the beginnings of problem solution. And again, as Alana said, some of that problem solution may need to be done through further development of rules or standards or norms, whatever we call them under DEPA, but they may not all need further regulation to be solved. Some of them clearly need government to government sort of understandings to provide the basis on which things can happen. But it may not be that that's the case for everything. And I think at this stage, it's a really important part of the process to try and sort through, to triage, if you like, because there's so much DEPA could do and so many areas it could look into further. We have to do a little bit of sorting and think, well, what can we prioritize? Where can we focus to begin with in the getting the basics right, for example, and how can we make sure that the placeholders we've got in there, if, for example, in the new frontier issues, how can we make sure we understand where we can focus the work to develop DEPA and provide the right trading and economic conditions for it to actually operate.
Great. Thank you, High Commissioner. And so Bradley, I've got the perfect sort of lead in to you. We've talked what Alana mentioned, and Sapnendu touched on it, and then the High Commissioner around what are the problems we're trying to solve. And obviously, given that New Zealand is a very advanced agrarian economy, where agri-tech plays a big role, and we're talking about that tomorrow. But food security, food safety, food assurance, whatever we want to call it, they're big problem to solve globally. Now we've talked about blockchain, we're talking about identity, transparency. Where do you see the opportunity for us to learn from some of the problems that we have to solve and work backwards to reverse engineer the solutions that we can build?
Thanks so much, and thanks for bringing me into this fantastic group of panelists. So on that specific question, I mean, there are all sorts of opportunities, I think, around digital agriculture and precision agriculture, helping reduce inputs, reduce cost, not just for farmers in the rich parts of the world, not just for farmers in New Zealand, but say in Indonesia and in Africa and elsewhere. So certainly lots of potential there. But kind of going back to Sapnendu's broader comments about the pandemic and digital acceleration, or in fact what might be better called like a distorted, more monopolistic sort of digital acceleration across the world. So I represent the United Nations, so my job is to be inherently optimistic, right? So I'm trying to find silver linings and in everything, but we do think that there really is a kind of silver lining behind this digital acceleration, particularly for post-pandemic provoked, maybe distorted digital acceleration. And we think that there's an opportunity, especially in the developing world, for countries to benefit sort of in an outsized way, right? In a few different areas, and especially around, we think, digital agriculture, helping farmers, say, in remote parts of Indonesia or Laos through digital farming and precision agriculture that reduces their cost, through digital finance when it can work, and in areas like virtual learning or telemedicine. So virtual learning isn't so great if you're sitting in Singapore or Auckland or Wellington or Hong Kong, but it might be the only option if you're sitting in somewhere in rural Sierra Leone, right? And the same with with telemedicine. It's not great to have to do that with your doctor if you're sitting where we're sitting right now, but again, it might be the only opportunity in rural parts of Africa. So how do we accelerate that? How do we make that happen faster, right? If that's the best the sort of scenario. So that's a kind of question I'd like to sort of throw back to the panelists, and what are the opportunities here for the rest of the world, for the developing world, which shouldn't be forgotten, but rather seen also as market opportunities for folks that are working on, for example, fintech in Singapore or agri-tech out of New Zealand. So I'd love Sapnendu and maybe Randeep's perspective on those questions. Like how do how do we amplify, accelerate the opportunities of this, okay, albeit distorted digital acceleration, but for the developing world in particular?
Yeah, specifically around what you touched on, Bradley, the social safety nets. How do we, how do we better enhance those?
To be clear, what's happened in sub-Saharan Africa with, for example, with the pandemic, I mean, it's not so much, it's terrible in terms of the health systems that, kind of didn't even exist and people are getting sick and have no health system. But what's happened is the global food supply has broken down, right? So people are dying of hunger, right? Because of the pandemic. So these are the sort of secondary, tertiary effects of the pandemic that people don't even kind of realize. But so how do we use digital promise to fix things like this? But back to you guys.
Yeah, so I'm going to point this to Randeep. Randeep, you stretched our imaginations to help us reimagine. So I'm going to pose this question to you around the social safety nets, as Bradley just discussed.
Yes, so I think what Bradley mentioned is certainly, a very challenging problem. And obviously, if you want to create social safety nets, you need resources and you need the wherewithal to be able to put them in place. But one thing which perhaps technology should be leveraged for is that at the moment, the social safety nets are generic, right? So it's the same thing for everybody below a particular income level. I feel that going forward, a social safety net will have to be highly personalized and customized to the specific needs and context of an individual, or of a family. It cannot be generic, because generic is also wasteful of resources in some sense. So if we could, devise systems which capture data better on the individual and are able to factor in that data to customize a response. So say if somebody falls ill, now that's a different proposition as compared to somebody who, say, loses a job. So the social safety net piece needs to be reimagined in the sense of being more data intensive and being more responsive and more personalized and customized to be able to mount a response to this. And perhaps in the process, to optimize and reduce the outflow of resources that would be required to sustain this.
Yeah. And if I could just jump in for a second too, to respond. I mean, like the whole notion around digital public goods is a super interesting one, and around open data, open AI, and so forth. But we're just starting on that, right? And it will take so much more work. So what is there to do kind of in the interim beyond setting up like what Singapore set up in terms of Veritas and sort of good governance for digital? How do we if the digital divide, it's sort of a law of mathematics or economics that if you accelerate digital transformation, you accelerate the digital divide, and then the cost, all right, the opportunity cost, if you are left behind, is worse and worse. As it gets better for a few, it gets worse and worse for a lot more. So how do we figure that out? I mean, these are super challenging questions, but one is to how do we figure out how to remove bias, for example, in digital ID, remove the bias from algorithms so that people are counted in the proper way and so forth. But again, would love to hear from others on the panel on these questions. So,
sorry, I think Alana, you want to say something?
I have so much to say on this topic. Yeah, I agree. It's really, really hard. But now is the opportunity to start to get into these questions. So on the open data part, there's only so much we can do at a national level, but we are doing very focused on that. So New Zealand launched an agri-tech strategy last week, and data and efficiency of production is a key part of that. Now, the agri-tech strategy is about the production, but also about the tech. So, which we're then hoping to, of course, sell overseas as well. So that then delivers benefits for production in other places. But I know that there's discussions in the FAO context around how to best use data to support things. But equally, so governments are part of it in terms of putting the framework in place to encourage sharing of data, to support firms to develop tech. But equally, it brings us back to those fundamental things that sit at the heart of the DEPA, but also digital trade rules as it existed for a long time, around just actually what fundamental rules and framework are you putting in place as a government that facilitates business but also trust. So things like, how are you regulating data? Are companies, so a small New Zealand agri-tech software company, able to move data around? How are farmers able to trust that the data that's been collected from their property is not being misused? How do you protect privacy? And I actually, just before coming into the session, got a privacy breach email from somewhere. And so there's the cyber dimension as well. There's the AI ethics piece. And this is why in the DEPA context, sorry to bring it back to DEPA, but we've flagged all of these issues as ones that we absolutely need to have a really serious conversation about domestically and internationally. But because we know they're part of the problem and hopefully part of the solution, but we just don't know what the answers are. So we hope that DEPA provides a hook for governments, experts, industry to all have that conversation and hopefully lift public good.
I think I was thinking is to the question of Bradley that in fact the brightest example during crisis of the true digital benefit did come from emerging market. If you look at optimism as and look for bright spots, that's an irony, not from developed economy. It never came from there. And there's a good example in India. There's a place in Gujarat where women self-help group were able to sustain the crisis because they had a sustainable pension plan before the crisis. And they were not only able to sustain themselves, in fact, the deposit, they had a deposit growth in the banks with the bank with. It's called, I think, Seva Bank or some bank, like I can't recollect the name. So you can see that a true digital transformation at the bottom of the pyramid does translate to real benefit, right? And best place to taste this crisis is this crisis itself. But let me answer the question around public good. I think public good could be misunderstood in many sense. When we say public good means is an ownership question, is a question of provenance, is a question of pricing, is a question of proprietary. I think we got to declutter each of them and understand when we talk about open public good. I think the interest of time, in my mind, a public good is where equality in access is maintained, and these public goods are connected globally, and there are governance, policy governance, or jurisdiction governments around managing these public rails, be it data, be it payment rails, be it ID. And then and there's a mechanism to allow all the apps, all the digital tools being built on top of that can run on systems which is trusted, predictable, scalable, and remains available always at any point of time. So to me, that's the true definition of open public rail. Open doesn't mean that people are mandated to open up the data set. Open means that there are mechanisms, there's an infrastructure which allows people to share data under a certain principle of fair play and sustainable contribution by every party to an open data set. So that's to me a definition of an open data services. And lastly, to end, I would end with one thing we got to solve, and the crisis has truly shown us that we got to get our minds behind a globally sustainable pension plan. I think we are constantly pushing that can down the street every time there's a crisis comes and shifting the dialogue to more upstream discussion. We have to go back and find a way to allow people, the citizens of the world, to have a sustainable system which allows them to dip into that savings or a pension structure when crisis comes. And this is not first time crisis is going to come. More crises are going to come down in years to come, but we got to quickly solve that problem. Not solving the problem is going to give us further painful experience as you get to the crisis.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sop. That was, I think you encapsulated a whole bunch of points there. I just wanted to touch on sustainability. I mean, you touched on inclusion. I wanted to shift a little bit to environmental sustainability and other aspects of sustainability. We're privileged to have the High Commissioner, who used to be New Zealand's ambassador to the UN for climate change. So she's she's not new to the subject of sustainability and the environment. And it is sustainability is a core ethos embedded into our Maori culture in New Zealand. So, High Commissioner, anything that you'd like to add where you see digital trade and role the broader sort of digital economy can play in driving these sustainability goals for us?
I think you're asking me the hard questions today, Amit. In fact, I'm definitely old to the climate change ambassador role. So I can't say that what I have is particularly fresh insights. I don't know that, I don't believe that the digital aspect of this has been a feature of discussions or has been properly explored up until now. But in a small area like agriculture, I think there have been a couple of references, Bradley and Alana, to the digital aspects of that, and how, for example, digital tools and the use of digital technology can help in lower carbon, cost efficient, and better, more productive agricultural production through, for example, the very precise and careful use of inputs like water or whatever they might be, or fertilizer, to grow crops or to grow food in ways that are much less resource intensive than they may have been in the past. There are probably a myriad examples of what that can look like, and it doesn't have to be high tech. It can be quite low tech that smallholder farmers in developing countries can use purely on the basis of their phones. They might have, rather than needing anything massively high tech to deliver it. But I do think there are a huge number of opportunities that we're probably only at the very edge of beginning to think about and put into place that do that reduce inputs, that get people to understand through the use of data, for example, how they are benchmarking compared with others, and you can apply that to home consumption of electricity, for example, with smart meters and with mechanisms that tell you how you, as an individual, are doing compared with your neighbours, and therefore what you can do to reduce your energy use and in a win-win, reduce your costs as a consumer.
Well, thank you for that, High Commissioner. And I also just wanted to highlight, I mean, one of the strengths of the New Zealand-Singapore partnership was shown at the start of the pandemic, and that's something that the High Commissioner was very involved in, with New Zealand and Singapore signing a mutual treaty where New Zealand gave Singapore food assurance, and Singapore gave New Zealand assurance around medical supplies. So I, for one, was very grateful. We still have food on our supermarket shelves, and it's been really well managed. I think Singapore, surprisingly, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow at the food assurance session, we hardly produce any food ourselves, but we're #1 globally in Singapore in the food security index. That's the Economist Food Security Index. But moving on just quickly as we wrap up, I did want to highlight a couple of things, some great takeaways. I wanted to highlight the fact that there is opportunity to participate in greater collaboration between Singapore and New Zealand. And I guess part of that onus will come back to the companies themselves and the industry itself in terms of how we leverage that. There were a few questions. There was a question from the audience, which unfortunately we weren't able to get answers to, but we have run out of time. I want to thank the panelists. It's been a great session, lots of discussion. Unfortunately, 30 minutes is never enough to get the benefit of the grunt and the horsepower, mental horsepower we have in this crowd. But thank you all. I wanted to highlight again that we do have 2 more very exciting sessions as part of the joint initiative from Ecosystem and the Singapore FinTech Festival. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Singapore time and 2 p.m. New Zealand time is the session around the role of technology in food assurance. Of course, Bradley Bastetter, who's on the panel here, is a keynote speaker there. And then later on, at 1 p.m. Singapore time and 5 p.m. New Zealand time, we've got the penultimate event, which is focused on green and sustainable fintech. And you've got Supindu Mohanty leading that session and sharing a lot more. So if you're keen to know more about what's going on in that space, please do join in. We look forward to the session tomorrow. I want to thank everyone for dialing in. I just wanted a reminder that this year, challenges bring opportunities, and the Singapore FinTech Festival took the opportunity to reshape and recraft the event this year, which last year we had over 60,000 people attend. This year, the Singapore FinTech Festival is going to be launching a fresher format. I won't ask Supindu to spill the beans here. This is your show, Sop, but do tune in if you want to know how the Singapore FinTech Festival is going to come to the world. There's a launch event on the 3rd of August where we learn more about what the format will look like and what the themes are going to be. So thank you once again. Stay well, stay safe, and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.